Hello there. Thank you for being here with me today. Please make yourself comfortable. I am going to tell you a story. It is my story, and it is not an easy one to tell. So, I appreciate you lending me your time and your ear. Before I begin my story, I would love to know which city you are joining us from. Please feel free to share in the comments. Now, let me take you into this story. You know, for the longest time, I thought I had it all. I really did. A life that was not flashy, not like the ones you see in the movies, but it was solid. It was real. It was the kind of life you build piece by piece, day by day, until you look around and think, this is it, this is good. I had a husband, Russell, who I had been with for 30 years. 30 years. We met in college, two kids with more dreams than sense, and we built a life together from scratch. I remember our first place. It was a tiny, drafty apartment with mismatched furniture that we found on the side of the road. We used a cardboard box as a coffee table for the first 6 months. But we were happy. We worked hard. Russell got a decent salary at his first corporate job, and I worked at the local library to help pay the bills. Eventually, we moved to a comfortable home in the suburbs. We had a son, Leo, who was the absolute undisputed light of my world. I was that wife, that mom, the one who remembered every single birthday, every parent-teacher association conference, every doctor appointment. I was the keeper of our family rhythm. I took pride in that. I knew that Russell liked his coffee with exactly 1.5 sugars, that he could not sleep without his favorite worn-out pillow. I was the one who made sure his favorite shirts were always clean and ironed for his business trips. I would stand at the ironing board for hours on Sunday afternoons, listening to the radio, making sure the collars were perfectly stiff so he would look good for his big meetings. He was always talking about getting a promotion, and I wanted him to look the part. I was the one who could whip up Leo's favorite macaroni and cheese from memory. Not the stuff out of the box. I made the kind with the baked breadcrumbs on top, just the way he liked it. I would boil the pasta, make a roux with butter and flour, slowly whisk in the sharp cheddar, and bake it until the edges were golden brown and bubbling. My life was a tapestry woven from these small everyday acts of love. And I cherished it. It was my purpose. I truly believed that this foundation of trust and shared history was unbreakable. That love, our love, was enough to protect me, to protect my dignity. I was wrong. My name is Lorraine, and this is the story of how my entire world was built on a lie. It is a story of betrayal. A betrayal so deep and so personal that it forced me to become someone I never imagined I could be. It all started so quietly, as these things often do. Not with a bang, but with a whisper. A little whisper of wrongness in a life that had always felt so right. It was a Tuesday afternoon in early spring. I remember the sun was streaming through the kitchen window, catching the dust motes dancing in the air. The faint smell of freshly cut grass drifted in from the neighbor yard. It was a perfectly ordinary day. I was sitting at our old oak table, the one we bought at a flea market when we were first married. Its surface was scarred with the history of 30 years of homework and family dinners. I was doing the monthly bills, just a normal, boring chore. I had a system. I would sort them into piles. Utilities, mortgage, credit cards, and pay them one by one. I always made sure to put a little extra into Leo's college fund every month. I wanted his future to be secure. As I opened the statement for our shared credit card, my eyes scanned the list of charges. The grocery store, the gas station, Leo's new soccer cleats, and then a line item that made me pause. $250. The Grand Regency Hotel. I frowned, tapping the paper. The Grand Regency was a fancy hotel downtown, the kind people used for romantic getaways or big corporate conferences. We had not been there. I would have remembered a $250 night at the Grand Regency. I thought back over the last month, picturing the calendar in my head. There was nothing. No anniversaries, no special occasions, just the steady, predictable rhythm of our lives. When Russell came home that evening, the smell of garlic bread already filling the house, I decided to bring it up. I did not want to be accusatory. I just wanted an explanation. I waited until after dinner, after we had cleared the plates and Leo had gone up to his room to do his homework. We were sitting in the living room, the television murmuring in the background. I was folding the laundry on the couch. I smoothed out one of his dress shirts, folded the sleeves perfectly, and placed it on the pile. "Hey honey," I said, trying to keep my voice light. "I saw a funny thing on the credit card bill this month." He looked up from his newspaper, peering at me over his reading glasses. "Oh, yeah. What is that?" "There is a charge from the Grand Regency downtown from a couple of weeks ago," I said. "Do you remember what that was for?" I watched his face carefully. There was no flicker of panic, no hesitation. He just blinked. Then a look of recognition dawned. "Oh, that right. The company booked a block of rooms for that marketing summit," he said. "A bunch of the executives from out of town flew in. I had to go down there for a dinner meeting one night." He folded his paper and set it aside. "Do not worry about it. The reimbursement check is already on its way," he told me. "I probably just forgot to submit the expense report right away." It sounded so plausible, so simple. It was a perfectly reasonable explanation, and I wanted to believe him. I was a wife who trusted her husband. That was the cornerstone of our entire marriage. So, I nodded. I smiled and picked up another shirt to fold. "Oh, okay. That makes sense," I said. I tucked the bill back into its envelope and put it in the paid pile. But as I went to sleep that night, lying next to him in our bed, I could not shake the feeling that something was off. It was just a little thing, a tiny detail. But it was a thread. And if I pulled on it, I was terrified that my whole world might unravel. So I did not. I told myself I was being silly, that 30 years of marriage had earned him the benefit of the doubt. But I could not shake the feeling that the ground beneath my feet had just shifted ever so slightly. That little seed of doubt started to grow over the next few months, watered by small, strange moments that just did not add up. My sister Brenda started coming over more often, which on the surface should have been a wonderful thing. We were sisters, only 2 years apart, and had always been close. Or so I thought. But her visits started to feel different. She would always show up on weekdays, usually on a Wednesday, when she knew Leo was at school, and I was at my part-time job at the local library. I would come home early one day, my shift ending unexpectedly, to find her car in the driveway. I walked up the front steps, fumbling for my keys, thinking how nice it would be to sit down and have a cup of tea with her. When I walked in, I heard laughter coming from the kitchen. I dropped my purse on the console table and walked down the hallway. I found her and Russell in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, laughing intimately over a half-empty bottle of wine. The air was thick with a kind of comfortable familiarity that felt exclusive, like an inside joke I was not a part of. They both jumped a little when I walked in, their smiles freezing for a split second before becoming overly bright, overly welcoming. "Lorraine," Brenda chirped, rushing over to hug me. The hug felt stiff and strange. "I just popped by to see if you had any extra flour for the bake sale." "Yeah," Russell added, swirling the wine in his glass. "Brenda was just telling me the funniest story about her neighbor." "You just missed it." I forced a smile. I looked at the flour canister sitting on the counter, completely untouched. "Oh well, the flour is in the pantry, you know that," I said. But the excuse felt thin, flimsy. And the way they looked at each other when they thought I was not watching. It was a look that passed between them that was more than just brother-in-law and sister-in-law. Then there were the phone calls. Russell had always been a bit attached to his phone, but now it was like an extension of his hand. He would be on it constantly, smiling and texting. I would be sitting across from him in the living room, trying to read a book, and the soft tapping of his thumbs on the screen would drive me crazy. But the moment I walked into the room or looked over, he would quickly lock the screen and put it face down on the table. "Just a work thing," he would mutter if I asked. Once his phone buzzed late at night after we had gone to bed. He snatched it off the nightstand so fast I barely saw the screen light up. He got out of bed and went into the bathroom to take the call, closing the door softly behind him. I lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling, my stomach in knots. I could hear the muffled sound of his voice, low and urgent. Our own mother, Beverly, seemed to be in on it, too, in her own subtle, manipulative way. During our weekly Sunday dinners, which were a mandatory tradition, she would make these little comments that felt like tiny, targeted digs. I would spend all Sunday morning preparing a massive roast, setting the good china, making sure everything was perfect. "Lorraine, you should let Russell have some fun," she would say if I mentioned he had been out late with clients twice that week. "A man with his kind of pressure at work needs an outlet. Do not be one of those controlling wives." Another time, when I mentioned Brenda seemed to be spending a lot of money lately on new clothes, my mother just smiled thinly. She took a slow sip of her water, looked at me down her nose, and said, "Well, it is nice to see her enjoying life. A woman should take care of herself." The underlying message was always there. Russell and Brenda could do no wrong, and if I had a problem with it, the problem was me. I felt like I was going crazy. I tried to bring it up with Russell once gently. We were in the car driving home from a movie. The streetlights were passing by, casting long shadows inside the car. "It seems like you and Brenda are spending a lot of time together lately," I said, trying to keep my voice light. He shot me a look of pure indignation. "She is your sister, Lorraine," he snapped. "Are you saying I cannot be friends with my own sister-in-law? My God, you are getting paranoid in your old age." The conversation was shut down. I was the paranoid one, the insecure one, the controlling one. They were so united, a solid wall of denial that made me question my own sanity. I started to pull back to watch from the sidelines, feeling like a stranger in my own home. I was still making the macaroni and cheese and ironing the shirts, but the joy was gone. It was just motion, a hollow routine I performed while a storm gathered inside me. The worst part was the loneliness. To be surrounded by your family, your husband, your sister, your own mother, and feel utterly completely alone. It is a cold, hollowing feeling. I was clinging to the hope that I was wrong, that this was all just a terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I think I already knew. I just was not ready to face it. The moment the illusion shattered was not dramatic. It was not a scene from a movie. There was no screaming match, no door slamming. It happened on a quiet Thursday night. The house was peaceful. Russell was watching a game in the den, and I was in the kitchen trying to find a recipe for a lemon meringue pie I wanted to make for the weekend. My old cookbook was falling apart. The pages were stained with vanilla extract and crusted with flour, so I decided to look it up online. Leo was in the living room doing his history project on my tablet. Our old desktop computer had finally given up the ghost a few weeks prior. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked into the living room. "Hey, sweetie," I called out. "Can I borrow my tablet for a few minutes? I need to look something up." "Sure, Mom," he said. A few minutes later, he came into the kitchen and handed it to me before heading upstairs. I sat down at the kitchen island, pulling a stool out. As I took the tablet, I saw that an instant messaging app was open on the screen, something I rarely used. And at the top of the conversation list was a group chat with a name I had never seen before, The Confidants. My heart gave a strange little flutter. Curiosity got the better of me. Who are these confidants? I tapped on the group name and the participants were listed right there. Russell, Brenda, and Beverly. My husband, my sister, and my mother. My blood ran cold. My hands started to tremble. I stared at the screen, the bright light harsh against my eyes. This had to be a mistake. Maybe it was for planning a surprise party for me. My birthday was a few months away. It was a desperate, flimsy hope, and I knew it. with a deep, shuddering breath, I started to scroll up. The conversation stretched back for months. And as I read, the world I knew, the life I had built, the very foundation of my identity crumbled into dust around me. It was all there in black and white. Vile, irrefutable proof. Brenda, he is taking me to that steakhouse Friday. Beverly, just tell her you are working late. My breath hitched. My hand flew to my mouth to stifle a sob. That was our anniversary steakhouse. The place Russell had proposed to me 31 years ago. A place I thought was sacred to us. Russell, done. She will not suspect a thing. She is too busy planning Leo's birthday party to notice anything. A wave of nausea washed over me. I had spent weeks planning that party. I had stayed up late to hand-make decorations, cutting out cardboard shapes, painting them, wanting every single detail to be perfect for my son, while he was using my love for our child as a cover for his sordid little trysts. I felt dizzy. I had to sit down at the kitchen table, the screen of the tablet glowing with betrayal. I kept scrolling, my eyes burning, forcing myself to absorb every poisonous word. They joked about a sweater I had bought him for Christmas. They mocked my taste in movies. They laughed about a time I had gotten a flat tire and had to call him for help. It was raining that night, and I was terrified on the side of the highway. I thought it was a sweet example of him being my hero. To them, it was a joke about my incompetence. And then came the message that broke me, the one that turned the knife. It was from my own mother. Beverly, just be careful. You, too. We cannot have her finding out before we secure the inheritance from your father's estate. Once that is settled and we have control of the trust, she will have no choice but to accept the new reality. Inheritance. My father, who had passed away 2 years prior, had been a careful, successful man. His funeral was one of the darkest days of my life, but he had made sure I would be taken care of. He had left me a significant sum along with the paid-off house we were living in, which had been in our family for generations. They were not just betraying me emotionally. They were actively plotting to steal my financial security, my legacy from my dad. This was not a passionate mistake. This was a cold, calculated conspiracy. In that moment, sitting in the dim light of my once happy kitchen, the old Lorraine, the trusting, loving, forgiving Lorraine died. She evaporated, leaving behind something cold, hard, and sharp. The grief was immense, a physical weight on my chest that made it hard to breathe. I wrapped my arms around my stomach, trying to hold myself together. But underneath the grief, a different feeling was beginning to smolder. It was rage. A pure, clean rage that burned away the confusion and the self-doubt. They thought I was a pushover. They thought I was just some naive housewife who would blindly sign over my inheritance and my home. They were about to find out what happens when you push someone too far. The days that followed were a blur of calculated numbness. I moved through my life like a ghost, an actress playing the part of myself. I performed my duties with a chilling precision. I made breakfast. I stood at the stove, cracking eggs into the pan, the sizzling sound loud against the quiet of the morning. The clinking of the silverware sounded unnaturally loud in the silent kitchen. I packed Leo's lunch. I made his favorite turkey sandwich, cut the crusts off just the way he liked, and tucked a little note inside just like always. My handwriting was the only thing that did not feel like a lie. I kissed Russell goodbye in the morning, the touch of my lips on his cheek feeling like ash. It was a phantom gesture from a life that was no longer real. But inside, I was a different person. My mind, which used to be filled with grocery lists and school meeting reminders, was now a whirlwind of planning, of piecing together the true extent of their deception. The rage was a constant hum beneath the surface, a furnace that kept me going. I would sit in my car in the grocery store parking lot, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white, letting the anger wash over me before I put my mask back on and went inside to buy milk and bread. Gemini said the final brutal confirmation came from the one person who never meant to hurt me. It came from my son, Leo. It was the final nail in the coffin of the family I thought I knew. It was a Saturday morning, a few days after I discovered the group chat. The weather was beautiful, one of those perfect autumn days where the air is crisp, and the sky is a brilliant, piercing blue. I remember standing on the back porch, holding a warm mug of coffee, watching the steam rise into the cool air. I was trying to force myself to breathe, to act normal. We were in the backyard planting some new tulip bulbs for the spring. It was a ritual we had, a small tradition. I laid out the gardening tools on the grass, the small metal trowel, the gardening gloves, and the brown paper bags filled with the bulbs. Leo was digging in the dirt, his face smudged and serious as he carefully placed a bulb in the hole he had made. He patted the dark soil down with his little hands. I was kneeling next to him, brushing some dirt off his knee, when out of nowhere, he looked up at me. He looked at me with his big, innocent eyes, the exact same color as mine, and he asked a question that stopped the entire world from turning. "Mom, why does Dad play the secret wrestling game with Aunt Brenda?" I froze. The small metal trowel slipped from my hand and landed with a soft thud on the grass. The birds in the trees seemed to stop singing. The wind seemed to stop blowing. My voice, when I finally found it, was a strained, raspy whisper. "What? What game is that, sweetie?" "You know," he said matter-of-factly, as if discussing a morning cartoon. "The one they play in your bedroom when you are at work. They close the door and tell me to be quiet because it is a grown-up game. Aunt Brenda always says, it is our little secret." My heart felt like it had been ripped directly from my chest and stomped into the dirt. They had not just done this behind my back. They had done it in my home, in my bed, with my child just rooms away down the hall. They had poisoned the sanctity of my home and tried to poison the innocence of my son, turning him into an unknowing accomplice in their sordid affair. Then, he added the final devastating detail. He went back to digging in the dirt and casually threw over his shoulder, "Aunt Brenda bought me that new Super Laser console. You know, she said it was a present for being so good at keeping secrets." The audacity of it. The sheer calculated cruelty was breathtaking. She had used an expensive toy to bribe my son into silence, to make him a co-conspirator against his own mother. That was it. That was the absolute point of no return. The grief and the shock hardened into a diamond-hard resolve. I realized then that I needed more than their messages. I needed proof that no one, not a judge, not a lawyer, not another family member, could ever possibly deny. I needed to see it with my own eyes. That afternoon, while Russell was out playing a round of golf with his friends and Brenda was supposedly at a yoga class, I drove to a large electronics store on the other side of town. I parked my car in the massive parking lot and just sat there for 10 minutes, gripping the steering wheel. I felt like a criminal. I felt dirty. I walked through the automatic sliding doors and wandered through the aisles of sleek gadgets and giant televisions. My hands were shaking slightly. I felt like a spy in a cheap movie. I eventually found what I was looking for in a section labeled Home Security. It was a tiny, motion-activated camera cleverly disguised as a standard phone charger block. It was small enough to be completely unnoticeable when plugged into the wall outlet next to my bedside table. That specific outlet had a direct, clear, unobstructed view of my bed. My marriage bed. Buying it felt clandestine and wrong. I paid in cash, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs as the young clerk rang me up. I was half expecting him to look at me and ask what a middle-aged woman needed a hidden camera for. He did not, of course. He was just a young kid doing his job, handing me my receipt without a second glance. Setting it up in my bedroom was one of the hardest things I have ever had to do. My hands felt incredibly clumsy. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise them. Every part of me screamed that this was wrong, that I should not have to spy in my own home. This was the kind of thing that happened to other people on daytime talk shows, not to me. But the woman I was becoming knew it was absolutely necessary. This was not about saving my marriage anymore. It was about survival. It was about gathering the weapons I would need for the massive war that was coming. I did not have to wait long. The very next day was a Wednesday. It was Brenda's usual day to pop by and check on things. That morning, while I was pouring coffee into Russell's travel mug, I told him I was taking on an extra shift at the library. It was a lie that slipped off my tongue with terrifying, smooth ease. I told him they were doing a big inventory check and needed all hands on deck. I needed an alibi, a solid reason to be gone from the house for several hours. "Have a good day at work, honey," he said, kissing my cheek before grabbing his briefcase. He did not look me in the eye. Instead of going to the library, I drove to a nondescript coffee shop miles away from my neighborhood, in a town where no one would know me. It was a small place that smelled heavily of roasted beans and burnt sugar. I chose a small table in the back corner, as far away from the windows as possible. I ordered a large black coffee I never intended to drink, set it on the table, and opened my laptop computer. My hands were slick with cold sweat as I connected my phone to the camera live feed. The screen loaded, and there it was. My perfectly made bed. The floral duvet cover I had picked out last spring. The two pillows side by side. And then, I waited. For 2 agonizing hours, I sat there pretending to read a book, my stomach churning violently. Every time a barista called out a name, I jumped. Every time the door chimed, my heart raced. Then, at exactly 2:15 in the afternoon, my phone buzzed on the table. It was a motion detection alert. My breath caught in my throat. I clicked on the alert and watched. I watched as my sister, Brenda, let herself into my house with a brass key I never even knew she had. I watched as my husband greeted her in the hallway, not with a friendly hug, but with a deep, passionate kiss that seemed to go on forever. His hands were instantly in her hair. I watched as they made their way, laughing, his arm wrapped tightly around her waist, directly into my bedroom. My bedroom. I should have turned it off. I should have slammed my laptop computer shut and thrown it against the brick wall of the coffee shop. But I could not. I was entirely paralyzed. I sat there in a public coffee shop with cheerful, upbeat music playing quietly in the background, and forced myself to witness the complete and utter desecration of my life. I watched them on my bed, the bed where I had slept for 30 years. The bed where my son had been conceived. The bed where I had cried myself to sleep for the past few weeks. And then, I saw it. The final, intimate betrayal. The small detail that would burn itself into my memory forever. Around Brenda's neck was a delicate gold locket. It caught the light coming through the bedroom window. It was my grandmother's locket. My grandmother had given it to me on my 16th birthday, her frail hands trembling as she fastened the clasp around my neck. It had gone missing years ago, and I had been absolutely heartbroken. I had spent weeks searching the house, crying, assuming I had lost it forever. I watched, frozen in my chair, as Russell reached out and took the gold locket in his fingers. He opened it, revealing the tiny, faded black and white photos of my parents on their wedding day inside. And he kissed it gently, right before he kissed my sister again. He had stolen a piece of my family history, a piece of my soul, and given it to her as a cheap trophy. I did not scream. I did not cry. A strange, chilling calm settled over me. It was the absolute calm of total certainty. There were no more doubts in my mind, no more desperate questions. There was only the cold, hard, undeniable truth. I reached out a perfectly steady hand and clicked the record button on my screen. I let the camera run for another 10 minutes, capturing more than enough undeniable evidence. Then, I saved the video file to a secure cloud drive on the internet, and I saved another copy to a separate, small digital drive I carried in my purse. I packed up my laptop computer. I stood up and walked out of that coffee shop, leaving a full, cold cup of coffee sitting on the table. The woman who had walked through those doors a few hours earlier was gone forever. In her place was a woman with a mission. They had treated me like an absolute fool. They had laughed at my expense. Now, they were going to see what their fool was truly capable of. The game was on, and I was going to win. The next morning, I called in sick to the library. I told my supervisor I had a terrible migraine, which was not entirely a lie. The pressure building behind my eyes was immense. But instead of staying in bed with the curtains drawn, I got dressed. I bypassed my usual comfortable clothes and reached into the back of my closet. I pulled out the nicest suit I owned, a sharp, tailored charcoal gray outfit I usually saved for important events or a funeral. It felt incredibly appropriate. This was, after all, the funeral of my marriage. I drove into the city. The traffic was heavy, but I did not care. I felt completely detached from the cars around me. My destination was a tall, imposing glass building downtown, with the names of a highly prestigious law firm etched in gold lettering on the heavy glass door. I had spent the entire night awake, researching. Fueled by endless cups of coffee and pure, unadulterated rage, I had scoured the internet looking for the best, most ruthless divorce lawyer I could possibly find. Her name was Evelyn Davies, and her reputation preceded her. Online reviews from former opposing clients called her the shark. They said she was brilliant, she was relentless, and she took absolutely no prisoners. She was exactly the person I needed. I sat in the plush, silent waiting room of her office. I felt small and slightly out of place among the expensive leather chairs, the thick mahogany tables, and the modern art on the walls. But when she walked out to greet me, I felt a flicker of real strength. She was a tall, imposing woman in her late 50s with sharp, intelligent eyes and an even sharper suit. She did not offer me a fake, pitiful smile. She did not offer fake sympathy. She just shook my hand firmly, her grip strong, and led me into her private office. Her office overlooked the entire city. It was a massive corner room with floor-to-ceiling windows, offering a view of pure power and control. I sat across from her at a polished mahogany desk, the city skyline looming behind her. "So, Mrs. Albright," she said, her voice crisp, clear, and totally professional. "Your phone call was urgent. Tell me exactly what is going on." I did not cry. I did not get hysterical. The time for tears was long over. I calmly opened my large leather purse, took out the small, unlabeled digital drive, and slid it across her perfectly clean desk. "Before I say anything," I said, my voice steadier than I ever expected it to be, "I need you to watch this." She raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow, but she did not ask questions. She took the drive, plugged it into her laptop computer, and clicked the file. I did not watch the screen. I watched her face. Her professional demeanor did not crack, but I saw her jaw tighten almost imperceptibly. I saw her sharp eyes narrow into thin slits. When the 10-minute video was over, she closed the laptop computer with a soft, definitive click and turned her full, undivided attention back to me. "I see," she said. Her voice was now laced with a cold, professional fury that perfectly mirrored my own. "Please continue." And so I did. I laid out absolutely everything. I reached into my bag and pulled out thick folders. I gave her the printed pages of the group chat, hundreds of pages of their vile, mocking correspondence. I gave her the bank statements I had secretly copied from the home office filing cabinet. I had spent hours highlighting the unexplained cash withdrawals and the massive wire transfers to a secret, separate account in Russell's name. Then, I told her about the money. I told her about my father's inheritance. I explained that the large house we were living in was legally mine, left to me in the family trust. I pulled out the final piece of paper. It was a document I had found buried at the very bottom of Russell's desk drawer. It showed a highly suspicious second mortgage that had been taken out against my house 6 months ago. It bore a clumsy, forged version of my signature. When I finally finished speaking, my throat dry, she leaned back in her expensive leather chair. She steepled her fingers together and looked at me for a long, silent moment. The silence stretched on, filled only by the faint hum of the city traffic far below. "Lorraine," she finally said, her voice dropping, becoming incredibly serious. "I want to be very clear with you. This is not just a standard infidelity case. This is a coordinated, systematic campaign of financial and emotional abuse, What your husband, your sister, and your own mother have done, it is not just morally wrong. It is criminal. We have them on bank fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and forgery. This goes far, far beyond a simple divorce. Hearing my deepest fears validated by this powerful, highly intelligent woman felt like a massive dam breaking inside my chest. The crushing weight I had been carrying completely alone for weeks suddenly felt a little lighter. I do not just want a divorce, I told her, the words tasting like cold metal in my mouth. I want to take back absolutely everything they have stolen from me. My money, my house, my life. I want full custody of my son. And I want to make sure they can never, ever do this to anyone ever again. Evelyn Davies smiled. It was a thin, sharp smile that did not quite reach her eyes. It was the smile of a predator that had just scented blood in the water. Oh, we will do far more than that, she said, leaning forward. We are going to completely dismantle their entire world. We will pursue this aggressively in civil court for the divorce and the immediate return of your financial assets. Furthermore, I will be personally handing over a complete copy of this file to the district attorney office. They will face criminal charges. We spent the next 2 solid hours mapping out an aggressive strategy. It was a 2-pronged attack. The first prong was the silent, lethal legal one. Evelyn Davies and her team of paralegals would immediately begin the complex process of freezing all joint assets. They would prepare a massive mountain of legal paperwork that would drop on my husband and my family like a sudden avalanche. The second prong was my own personal mission. I told her I could not just sit back and let this quietly play out in sterile courtrooms through lawyers. I needed to confront them. I needed to look them directly in the eyes. I needed to see the exact looks on their faces when their perfect, smug, secret world came crashing down around them. And I knew the absolute perfect place to do it. Our family had a long-standing tradition. Every single month, we had a massive, mandatory Sunday dinner at my mother's house. It was their main stage. It was the place where my mother, Beverly, played the role of the benevolent, wealthy matriarch, and they all gathered to reinforce their intricate web of lies. The next dinner was supposed to be next week. It would be their last supper. I would be the one serving up the justice, and it would be a dish served incredibly cold. Evelyn Davies considered this for a moment, tapping a pen on her desk. Finally, she nodded in agreement. A public confrontation, especially in front of an unknowing witness like your sister's husband, will make their denials in court all the more difficult. We will use the element of complete surprise. For the entire next week, I became the greatest actress of my lifetime. I went back home and I played the part of the happy, totally oblivious wife. It was the most excruciatingly difficult performance of my entire life. I stood at the door and smiled warmly when Russell walked in from work. I took his coat. I made his absolute favorite dinner, a slow-cooked pot roast with carrots and potatoes. We sat at the table, and I asked him about his day at the office. I listened to his fabricated stories about stressful meetings and demanding clients with a serene, deeply interested expression on my face. Inside, I was a tightly coiled spring of pure rage and anticipation. But on the surface, I was a placid, calm lake. Sharing a bed with him was the absolute worst part. Lying there in the dark, feeling the warmth of his body radiating next to mine under the blankets. A body that had been tangled with my own sister just days before. I would lie perfectly still, staring at the ceiling, and wait. I would wait until his breathing evened out into a deep, steady sleep. And then, I would quietly slip out from under the covers. I would walk downstairs on my bare feet, avoiding the floorboards I knew would creak. I would sit in the dark kitchen, the only light coming from the screen of my laptop computer. I would go over the files again and again. I organized the evidence. I fed my rage. I strengthened my resolve. I was like a military general planning a major battle, memorizing every single detail of the enemy weakness. Brenda called me twice that week on the phone. Her voice dripped with a fake, cloying concern that made me physically nauseous. I now saw it clearly for exactly what it was. "Hey sis," she said over the phone line. "Just checking in. You have seemed a little quiet lately. Is everything okay?" "Just really tired from work," I replied, forcing my voice to be as smooth as silk. "They are working me hard at the library. I am really looking forward to Sunday dinner, though. It will be nice for us all to be together as a family." "Me, too," she chirped, completely oblivious to the trap she was walking into. "I am making my famous apple crumble for dessert." The heavy irony was so thick I could have choked on it. The plan for the dinner confrontation was simple, but it was designed to be totally devastating. Evelyn Davies had helped me prepare 4 separate packages. I bought 4 thick, heavy brown manila envelopes from the office supply store. Inside each envelope was a carefully curated collection of their specific crimes, perfectly tailored to the recipient. For Russell, the envelope contained printed screenshots of his most explicit, damning text messages with Brenda. It contained glossy, high-quality photographs printed from the bedroom video. It also contained the highlighted bank statements showing the money he had illegally moved from our joint savings account to his secret personal one. For Brenda, the envelope contained her own highly incriminating text messages. It included solid proof of her lavish credit card spending funded by my husband. Most importantly, it contained a clear copy of the deed to my house, showing the fraudulent loan they had taken out against it to fund their lifestyle. And for my mother, Beverly, the envelope was thickest of all. It contained her cruel text messages orchestrating the entire affair. It highlighted the specific messages where she detailed her master plan regarding my father's inheritance. It also included financial printouts showing that the college fund my father had lovingly set up for Leo was being systematically drained by her and Russell. The 4th envelope was for Brenda's husband, Dale. Dale was a good, hard-working, simple man who worked as an independent contractor. He loved his wife and his son. He had absolutely no idea he was living in a massive lie, too. His envelope was the thinnest, but it was perhaps the most brutal. It contained only exactly what he needed to know. It held concrete proof of the affair, and bank records showing that Brenda had been stealing directly from their own son's education savings to fund her secret life. The day of the dinner finally arrived. Sunday. First, I made absolutely sure Leo had a sleepover arranged at his best friend's house across town. I packed his little overnight bag with his pajamas and his toothbrush. I drove him over in the early afternoon. When I dropped him off, I pulled him into a hug that lasted a little longer, a little tighter than usual. I buried my face in his hair, smelling the familiar scent of his shampoo. "I love you more than anything in the entire world. You know that, right?" I whispered to him. He pulled back, grinning at me. "I know, Mom. You are being weird," he laughed, and ran off toward his friend's front door to play video games. I watched him go, a fierce protectiveness swelling in my chest. I would absolutely not have my innocent son witness the absolute carnage that was about to unfold. I drove back home to get ready. As I stood in front of the bathroom mirror, I looked closely at myself. The woman looking back at me was fundamentally different. The softness that used to sit around my eyes was completely gone, replaced by a steely, unyielding glint. The perpetual little worry line that used to live between my eyebrows had totally smoothed out, replaced by a look of grim, absolute determination. I chose my outfit incredibly carefully. I did not want to look messy or emotional. I picked out a simple, elegant, dark blue tailored dress and a pair of sensible heels. I brushed my hair until it shone. I applied my makeup with a steady hand. I wanted to look completely composed. I wanted to look entirely in control. I was not a helpless victim about to be thrown to the wolves. I was the hunter, and the trap was perfectly set. Tonight, the pathetic charade would end. Tonight, they would finally meet the powerful woman they had inadvertently created. I placed the 4 heavy manila envelopes into a large, structured leather handbag. I walked downstairs, grabbed my car keys, and walked out the front door. The drive to my mother's house felt entirely surreal. The sun was beginning to set, casting long, golden shadows across the familiar streets of my childhood town. The town looked different now, colored by the new, harsh, ugly reality I was living in. Beverly's house was the absolute epicenter of our family's life. It was a large, pristine, white colonial-style home with tall columns framing the front porch and a perfectly manicured green lawn. It always screamed old wealth and good taste on the outside. But as I pulled my car into the long, sweeping driveway, I now knew it was completely rotting from the inside out. It was a beautiful, expensive facade hiding a core of total moral decay. I turned off the engine, took a deep breath, grabbed my heavy handbag, and walked up the front steps. I rang the doorbell. When I walked through the front door, the scene was disgustingly, sickeningly perfect. The rich, warm smell of roasting beef, rosemary, and baked potatoes filled the air. My mother, Beverly, greeted me in the grand entryway. She was wearing a silk blouse and a pearl necklace. She leaned in and gave me a kiss on the cheek that felt exactly like the cold touch of a snake. "Lorraine, darling," she said, her voice dripping with fake warmth. "I am so incredibly glad you could make it. You look lovely tonight." I walked into the large living room. Russell was already there, standing by the fireplace. He was holding a heavy crystal glass of expensive whiskey, laughing heartily at a joke. He was talking with Brenda's husband, Dale. Dale was wearing a simple plaid shirt, smiling easily, completely unaware of the knife hovering over his back. Brenda came bustling out of the massive gourmet kitchen. She was wiping her hands on a frilly, decorative apron, perfectly playing the part of the beautiful, helpful daughter. "Lorraine, you look great," she chirped, her voice pitching a little too high, a little too enthusiastic. She walked over and hugged me. It was a quick, brittle, nervous embrace. I had to clench my jaw and use every single ounce of my self-control not to physically recoil from her touch. As she pulled away, I looked down at her chest. I could see the outline of the cold metal of my grandmother's locket resting underneath her thin cashmere sweater, right against her skin. My locket. The hot rage inside me flared up brilliantly, threatening to consume me, but I violently pushed it down. Not yet. The timing had to be perfect. "Dinner is ready, everyone," my mother announced grandly. We all gathered in the formal dining room. We sat down around the huge, polished mahogany table. That table had hosted 100 happy family celebrations. It had hosted 100 Christmases, birthdays, and Thanksgivings. It had also hosted 100 disgusting lies. The table was set flawlessly with my mother's expensive fine china, heavy silver cutlery, and crystal wine glasses. Dale was seated directly next to Brenda. As he sat down, he reached over and took her hand, giving it a gentle, loving squeeze. My stomach turned over. My mother sat at the head of the long table, beaming proudly like a queen presiding over her loyal court. Russell sat right beside me. At one point during the meal, he actually had the absolute audacity to reach his hand under the table, place it on my knee, and squeeze it affectionately. I wanted to be violently sick right there on the Persian rug. I immediately shifted in my chair and moved my leg far away. He gave me a slightly puzzled, mildly annoyed look, then went back to eating his roast beef. The conversation around the table was incredibly light, totally meaningless. It was a grand symphony of hypocrisy. They talked about the rising stock market. They talked about the unseasonably warm weather. They talked about a new crime show on television. All the while, I sat there quietly. I could feel the heavy, physical weight of the 4 manila envelopes resting inside my large handbag by my feet. My heart was pounding a steady, heavy, rhythmic drum beat against my ribs, but outwardly, my hands were perfectly, terrifyingly still. I ate my roast beef. I chewed my potatoes. I complimented my mother on how tender the meat was. I forced a smile at Dale's corny jokes. I played my role as the docile wife and daughter one final, spectacular time. Then, the plates were cleared. My mother stood up, smoothing her silk blouse. Alright, everyone. I am going to the kitchen to bring out Brenda's famous apple crumble for dessert. Who wants coffee? This was the moment. I cleared my throat. The sound was surprisingly loud in the room. Actually, Mom, before we have dessert, I said. My voice was loud, clear, and it cut straight through the cheerful, post-dinner chatter like a jagged shard of glass. The room instantly fell silent. Everyone turned to look at me. My mother stopped halfway to the kitchen door. Russell stopped with his wine glass halfway to his mouth. I have something I would very much like to share with everyone, I continued. My voice was dangerously calm, completely devoid of any emotion. It is a little family project I have been working on lately. I pushed my chair back slightly. I reached down, my movements incredibly slow and deliberate. I opened my handbag and retrieved the 4 thick brown envelopes. I stood up. The sound of my wooden chair scraping loudly against the polished hardwood floor seemed to echo endlessly in the silent dining room. I walked slowly around the massive table. I felt like a grim reaper, quietly delivering judgment. I walked behind Russell and placed a heavy envelope squarely in front of his plate. I walked over to Brenda and dropped the second envelope in front of her. I walked to the head of the table and placed the thickest envelope directly in front of my mother. Beverly looked down at the thick brown package, her manicured eyebrows pulling together in confusion. Lorraine, what on earth is this? Is this some kind of ridiculous joke? I stopped walking and stood at the far end of the table, facing all of them. Go ahead, I said. My voice was as cold and flat as a frozen winter lake. Open them. The sound of heavy paper tearing was absolutely deafening in the dead silence of the room. I stood perfectly still, my hands clasped in front of me, and I watched their faces, one by one. I watched Russell first. I saw his usual confident, arrogant smirk instantly falter as he pulled out the first piece of paper. It was the printed screenshot of him and Brenda kissing passionately in my front hallway. I literally saw the blood drain from his face. His skin turned a pasty, sickly, terrifying shade of white as his shaking hands flipped through the glossy, high-resolution photographs from the hidden bedroom camera. Then, I looked at my sister. I saw Brenda's hand fly up to cover her mouth. A loud, choked gasp violently escaped her lips as she read the pages of her own treacherous, mocking text messages. I saw her eyes go wide with pure terror. She darted her eyes around the room frantically, looking exactly like a trapped, desperate animal caught in a snare. Next, I looked at my mother. I saw her perfectly practiced, regal composure completely shatter into a million tiny pieces. Her face turned a mottled, incredibly ugly shade of dark red as she stared down at the concrete, printed evidence of her financial conspiracy. She was looking at the exact documents detailing her master plan to steal my inheritance and drain her own grandson's money. Dale sat there, utterly confused. He had not received an envelope yet. He looked from his wife's completely horrified, pale face to my cold, staring face. Lorraine, for God's sake, what is going on here? Dale asked, his voice trembling slightly. I reached into my bag one last time. I pulled out the 4th, thinnest envelope. I walked over to where Dale was sitting and gently handed it to him. As I looked down at him, my eyes softened with a deep, genuine pity that I only felt for him in that room. I think you deserve to know the truth, Dale, I said softly. You are a part of this family, too. And you have been lied to just as much as I have. Dale looked at the envelope, then slowly opened the flap. He pulled out the papers. I stood back and watched. His face, as he began to read, went through a rapid, terrible, heartbreaking transformation. First, there was total confusion. He blinked hard, as if the words on the page were written in a foreign language. Then, the confusion slowly turned to absolute disbelief. He looked up at Brenda, shaking his head slightly, waiting for her to tell him it was a prank. But Brenda could not even look at him. She was sobbing into her hands. The disbelief morphed into dawning, crushing horror. And finally, his face settled into a look of such profound, gut-wrenching pain that I almost had to look away. He looked at the printed bank statements. He looked at the undeniable proof that the college fund he had worked so incredibly hard in the hot sun for years to build for his son, Michael, was nearly completely empty. The silence that followed was incredibly heavy. It was suffocating. It was the deafening silence of utter, total ruin. And then, all hell completely broke loose in the dining room. "What the hell is this?" Russell finally hissed. His voice was a strangled, high-pitched whisper. He violently shoved the glossy photographs away from him across the polished table, as if the paper itself were contaminated with poison. He jumped up from his chair. He looked at me, his eyes wide with a wild mixture of utter fear and explosive fury. "Lorraine, why would you do this?" he yelled, his face turning red. "This is private. How could you do this?" "Do this?" I repeated slowly. A laugh suddenly bubbled up in my chest. It was a harsh, bitter, ugly sound that I did not even recognize as my own. It escaped my lips and echoed in the room. "You mean, expose your pathetic lies?" I asked, my voice suddenly rising in volume. "Expose your cheating? Expose the absolute fact that you have been sleeping with my own sister, in my own house, on my own bed? Was that private, too, Russell? Or was it just my dignity that you did not mind making incredibly public?" Brenda started to sob loudly. They were thick, theatrical, heaving tears that held absolutely no currency with me anymore. She reached out a shaking hand toward me. "Lorraine, please," she wailed. "It is not what it looks like. You are completely twisting everything. We were just comforting each other. You have been so cold and distant lately." "Distant?" I shot back, stepping toward her. The rage was fully unleashed now. I have been distant? Or was I just too busy running our home, raising our son, cooking your meals, washing your clothes, and managing the entire life that you were both so busy blowing up behind my back? I turned back to Brenda, pointing a stiff, trembling finger directly at the pile of papers in front of her. "And am I twisting those official bank records, Brenda?" I demanded loudly. "Am I twisting the fraudulent, illegal loan that you and Mom took out against my house? The house my father explicitly left to me in his will?" That is when Dale finally spoke. The sound of his voice stopped everyone. He slowly stood up. He was a big, strong man, but he looked completely broken. He held up a single piece of paper from his envelope. His large hand was shaking violently. He looked down at Brenda. His voice cracked with a deep, agonizing pain that was awful to witness. "The college fund," Dale whispered, his voice thick with tears. "Brenda, you took the money we saved for Michael's future. For his education." Brenda just sat there, staring up at her husband. Her face was a twisted mask of absolute guilt. Her mouth opened and closed, but she was completely unable to speak. "You looked me in the eye and told me the stock market was down," Dale whispered, the terrible realization fully dawning on him. "You lied to my face every single day for months." My mother, Beverly, finally found her voice. The shock wore off, and the nasty, vicious core of her personality rushed to the surface. She slammed her hand flat down hard on the mahogany table, making the fine china and silverware rattle loudly. "How dare you?" she shrieked. Her face was contorted into a mask of pure rage. She pointed a heavy, jeweled finger directly at my face. "You come into my house on a Sunday, you ruin dinner, and you try to tear this beautiful family apart. After absolutely everything we have done for you." "Everything you have done for me?" I yelled back, stepping aggressively toward the head of the table. My voice was low, incredibly dangerous, and vibrating with years of repressed anger. "You mean everything you have done to me. You plotted with them. You actively encouraged this affair." I picked up the thickest stack of papers and threw them back down in front of her. "You, my own mother, helped them plan exactly how to steal my inheritance before I even knew it existed. You ungrateful little witch," she spat back. Her polished mask of high society sophistication was completely gone, fully revealing the incredibly ugly, greedy face beneath. Russell deserved to be happy. Brenda deserved to be happy. You were always so dull. So incredibly predictable. Always playing the pathetic martyr. You should have been down on your knees, grateful that a man like him stayed with you as long as he did. Her cruel words were specifically meant to cut me deep, and they did. I felt a sharp pain in my chest. But they also did something else, something very important. They finally, permanently severed the very last, lingering thread of any love, duty, or obligation I ever felt for her. She was not a mother. She was a monster wrapped in a cashmere sweater. I was a good wife, I said. My voice was trembling now, not with fear, but with a massive fury I had held inside for weeks. I was a good daughter. I was a good sister. I looked around at all three of them. And you took my love, and my absolute trust, and you used it as a weapon against me. You laughed at me in your secret little group chat. You literally called me a pushover. I leaned in very close across the table, my eyes locked dead onto my mother's eyes. Well, listen to me carefully. The pushover is completely done being pushed. It was at that exact moment, right in the middle of the chaotic shouting and the crying, that Brenda completely snapped. Maybe it was the crushing weight of the guilt. Maybe it was the sheer terror of her secret life being violently exposed. Or maybe it was simply the sight of her own husband looking down at her with pure, unadulterated contempt. She let out a loud, guttural scream. It was a terrifying sound of pure animal rage. She pushed her heavy chair back, leaped to her feet, and lunged violently across the dining room table directly at me. Her hands were like claws. She knocked over a crystal wine glass, sending dark red wine spilling across the expensive white tablecloth like blood. Her fingernails clawed wildly at my face. I stumbled backward in shock, and a sharp, burning sting erupted on my left cheek as her nails broke the skin. She scrambled over the edge of the table, coming at me again, grabbing a tight handful of my hair. She was shrieking, spit flying from her mouth. You ruined my life. You ruined absolutely everything. A deep, primal survival instinct I never even knew I possessed completely took over my body. I was no longer the quiet, polite librarian. I was a cornered animal fighting for its life. I planted my feet firmly, grabbed her shoulders, and pushed her backward with every single ounce of strength I had. I broke her tight grip on my hair. She stumbled backward, her heels catching on the edge of the thick Persian rug. She tripped over a heavy dining chair and went sprawling backward onto the hardwood floor with a massive, loud crash. The dining room instantly descended into utter, violent chaos. Russell and Dale both rushed forward quickly to pull us apart, both men shouting loudly. My mother was standing at the head of the table, screaming hysterically about calling the police and having me arrested. Dale managed to grab a thrashing, wildly hysterical Brenda. He hauled her to her feet, wrapping his strong arms around her to pin her arms to her sides. Russell stepped directly between me and his mistress, his hands held up defensively in front of him, as if to ward me off from attacking again. Lorraine, stop. This is completely insane. Russell yelled, his face panicked. Look at what you are doing to us. I stood there in the middle of the room, breathing heavily, my chest heaving up and down. My hair was a messy tangle around my face. I could feel a warm drop of blood slowly trailing down from the stinging scratch on my cheek. I slowly looked around at the absolute wreckage surrounding me. I looked at my violently weeping sister, fighting against her husband's grip. I looked at my terrified, pathetic husband. I looked at my apoplectic, screaming mother. And I looked at Dale, a good man whose entire world had just been completely detonated. The beautiful, formal dining room was a literal war zone. The expensive roast beef was getting cold on the fine china. The famous apple crumble would never, ever be served. And I had successfully started the war. In the ringing silence that followed the brief physical fight, the only sound was Brenda's ragged, loud sobbing. My mother was the first one to recover her wits. She reached over and fumbled for her expensive smartphone on the table, her hands shaking violently with rage. "That is it. I am calling the police right now," she screamed. "I am having you arrested for physical assault. I saw you push your sister to the ground." I just looked at her. I felt absolutely nothing. I felt no fear. I felt no panic. I felt only a cold, incredible, clear certainty. I was 10 massive steps ahead of him. "Go right ahead, Mom," I said. My voice was chillingly calm and steady. "Call the police. Dial the number. I am absolutely sure they will be very, very interested in looking at the contents of this envelope right here." I reached down and picked up her specific packet of evidence from where it had fallen on the table. I waved the thick brown envelope gently in the air. "It has got absolutely everything in it," I continued, making sure my voice carried clearly to every corner of the room. "The detailed conspiracy to commit financial fraud. The forged signatures on the banking loan documents. You do know that wire fraud across state lines is a massive federal offense, do you not?" I paused, letting the heavy words hang in the air. "You see, I had a very long, very interesting chat with my attorney this week. Her name is Evelyn Davies. She was incredibly clear on the potential legal ramifications of what you three have done. I am absolutely sure the district attorney will have an absolute field day reading your family-only group chat messages." I looked my mother dead in the eyes. I might get a tiny slap on the wrist tonight for defending myself against Brenda attacking me. But you? You three are looking at actual, real prison time. I watched, deeply satisfied, as all the remaining color completely drained from my mother's face. The heavy hand holding her smartphone slowly, defeatedly lowered to her side. The word lawyer and federal offense had hit their mark flawlessly. She knew I had her. They were all completely trapped in the sticky web they had so carefully, maliciously woven for me. I stood up perfectly straight and reached down to pull my dark blue dress back into place. I smoothed my hair. I felt a strange, intoxicating sense of immense power, of ultimate clarity. For the very first time in my entire life, I was the one holding all the cards. I was the one in absolute control. I looked slowly at each of them. My voice left absolutely no room for any argument. "Here is exactly what is going to happen," I began, addressing the ruined dining room like a powerful corporate executive executing a hostile takeover. "Russell," I said, turning my cold gaze to him. "My lawyer will be legally serving you with official divorce papers tomorrow morning at exactly 9 o'clock at your office lobby. Do not bother trying to come back to the house tonight. I already had a locksmith come and change all the exterior locks this afternoon while you were out playing golf." His mouth opened and closed silently, looking exactly like a fish gasping for air on a dock. You cannot do that," he stammered weakly. "Half of that house is mine." "Actually, it is not," I said, my voice dripping with ice. "The house was legally part of my sole inheritance. And as for our other joint financial assets, my lawyer has already filed an emergency motion to have every single bank account completely frozen, pending a massive investigation into the significant funds you have been illegally embezzling." I let out a short, humorless breath. "You will be incredibly lucky if you walk away from this divorce with your golf clubs." I slowly turned to my sister. Brenda was now leaning heavily against Dale, but he was holding her at arm's length, looking at her with pure, unadulterated disgust. She was looking at me with pure hatred burning in her red, puffy, tear-rimmed eyes. "Brenda," I said sharply, "I highly suggest you go out and hire a very, very good criminal defense lawyer. Because not only am I personally suing you in civil court for your direct part in the fraudulent home loan, but Dale here seems to have his own major case against you for completely emptying out your son's college fund." Dale just nodded numbly. He kept holding his wife at arm's length, treating her as if her very skin were made of poison. "And that gold locket around your neck," I added, stepping closer to her, my voice dropping to a dangerous hiss. "It was a sacred gift from my grandmother. I will be expecting it returned to my lawyer's office by tomorrow afternoon. Do not make me come back for it. Finally, I turned back to my mother at the head of the table. She looked physically shrunken, utterly and completely defeated. The arrogant matriarch was gone. "And you," I said. My voice dropped to a low, intense whisper that carried clearly across the room. "You will never, ever see your grandson again. You will not call my house. You will not try to visit his school. You will not send him birthday gifts. He will absolutely not be a part of your toxic, lying, greedy world. You are completely dead to him, and you are completely dead to me. You made your choice." I did not wait a single second for a response from any of them. I reached down, picked up my large leather handbag from the floor, turned my back on the smoking ruins of my former family, and walked straight out of the dining room. I walked down the long hallway, pulled the heavy oak front door open, and stepped out into the cool night air. I walked down the driveway to my car without giving a single look back at the house. I got into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. As I put the car in drive and drove away down the dark, tree-lined street, I did not cry. I did not shed a single tear. Instead, I took a deep, shuddering breath, and for the first time in months, my chest did not hurt. I felt incredibly, wonderfully free. The war had just officially begun, but I knew in my bones I had already won the absolute most important battle. I had finally won myself back. The weeks and months that followed that explosive Sunday dinner were an absolute whirlwind of intense, exhausting legal proceedings. Evelyn Davies was, in a single word, magnificent. She was a brilliant 5-star general, and I was her fiercely loyal soldier. We had long daily phone calls. I spent hours sitting in her beautiful downtown office, drinking terrible coffee, going over complex legal strategy. She filed aggressive injunctions, strict restraining orders, and endless financial motions with a dizzying, relentless speed that left the other side completely reeling. My mother, Russell, and Brenda scrambled and pooled their money to hire a sleazy defense lawyer. He desperately tried to paint me to the judge as an unstable, crazy, vengeful woman who was overreacting to a minor family disagreement. But the massive mountain of hard, physical evidence I had gathered was totally irrefutable. We had the highly explicit video file from the bedroom camera. We had the hundreds of printed text messages. We had the meticulous bank records. And we had the forged signature on the second mortgage, which was officially confirmed as a fake by an independent, court-appointed handwriting expert. They told a clear, devastating story that absolutely no lawyer in the world could ever spin. Dale, staying true to his word at the dinner, officially filed for divorce from Brenda the very next week. He ended up being my strongest, most reliable ally throughout the entire horrible process. He voluntarily provided his own private financial records to my lawyer, which uncovered even more of Brenda's massive deceptions. It quickly turned out she had been actively stealing from Dale's business accounts for years. She was secretly funding a lavish lifestyle of expensive shopping sprees for designer handbags and luxurious weekend spa days with Russell, all while looking Dale in the eye and telling him they needed to stay on a tight budget. Dale immediately moved out of their shared house. He fought like a lion in family court and easily won sole custody of their son, Michael. I felt a deep, profound sadness for Dale. He was just another innocent casualty caught in their selfish, greedy war. We spoke on the phone a few times late at night, two exhausted survivors clinging to the wreckage of the same sunken shipwreck, offering each other quiet, understanding support. The financial fallout for the three of them was absolutely catastrophic. The civil court immediately froze all of their bank assets pending the massive federal fraud investigation. My mother, Beverly, saw her pristine reputation in her snobby high society circle completely destroyed when word inevitably got out about what she had done to her own daughter. People stopped returning her calls. Her country club membership was quietly revoked. Russell faced total professional ruin. He was immediately fired from his high-paying, prestigious executive job. The corporate board of directors at his firm learned he was actively under criminal investigation for severe financial fraud. It turns out, large financial companies have a very strict morality and ethics clause in their contracts, and they certainly did not appreciate the terrible press. He had been on the fast track for a huge promotion to vice president, but now, he was totally unemployable in his industry. They lost absolutely everything because they were greedy. They plotted and schemed because they wanted what was legally mine. And in trying so hard to take it from me, they lost everything that was rightfully theirs. The custody battle for my son, Leo, was the hardest, most terrifying part of the entire ordeal. That was the only front where I felt genuine, cold fear. Russell and my mother desperately tried to use the physical fight at the Sunday dinner against me. They submitted affidavits claiming I was a highly violent, mentally unstable, and completely unfit mother. Their sleazy lawyer brought it up during a formal, recorded deposition. It was a long, grueling, 4-hour meeting in a sterile, brightly lit conference room. Mrs. Albright, their lawyer said, leaning across the table and sneering at me. Is it not true that you violently and physically assaulted your own sister without provocation? Before I could even open my mouth to answer, Evelyn Davies smoothly slid a thick document folder across the polished conference table. It is completely true that my client bravely defended herself after being violently, physically attacked by her sister, Evelyn said calmly. But perhaps, counselor, you would be far more interested in reading these documents first. She tapped the folder. These are subpoenaed text messages directly between your 3 clients, specifically dated the week prior to the dinner in question. In these messages, they explicitly and clearly discuss a coordinated plan to verbally abuse and intentionally provoke my client into an emotional outburst. An outburst they plan to record and then use against her in a future divorce and custody proceeding to steal her child. The opposing lawyer picked up the pages. I watched in immense satisfaction as his face went completely pale as he read his client's own words. When we presented that specific evidence in a closed hearing, the family court judge was absolutely appalled. The judge slammed his gavel down and immediately granted me full, sole custody of Leo. Russell was granted severely restricted rights. He was allowed only highly supervised visitation twice a month, held at a neutral, state-run facility with a social worker present in the room. The official social worker report from their very first visit said it all. Russell spent the entire hour desperately trying to manipulate Leo. He tried to convince a young boy that I was the bad guy, that I had cruelly broken up their happy family. But Leo, my incredibly smart, fiercely perceptive boy, simply sat in the plastic chair, looked directly at his father, and said, "You are the one who played the secret game with Aunt Brenda. Mom did not do anything wrong." After that disastrous first meeting, Russell's visits became much shorter, and far less frequent. He simply could not face the cold, hard truth reflecting back at him in his own son's eyes. With the exhausting legal battles mostly settled and behind us, I knew deep in my heart that Leo and I could not stay in that town anymore. The large, beautiful house was no longer a warm home. It felt like a cold crime scene, filled with the lingering ghosts of a life that had been a complete lie. The civil courts had firmly affirmed that the house was solely mine, a protected part of my inheritance. Furthermore, the judge ordered Russell and Beverly to fully repay the fraudulent loan they had illegally taken out. I decided to sell the house. I hired a local, aggressive realtor, put a massive for sale sign on the front lawn, and held a huge estate sale over a long weekend. I ruthlessly sold the expensive leather furniture they had bought using my stolen money. I sold the fancy, delicate china we almost never used. I stood on the front lawn, drinking coffee from a paper cup, and watched as total strangers walked casually through the rooms of my former life, picking over the physical remnants of my destroyed marriage. It was a painful process, saying goodbye to the walls I had painted and the garden I had planted, but it was also incredibly, deeply liberating. Every item sold felt like a heavy weight being lifted from my shoulders. I carefully packed up only the things that truly mattered. I packed heavy cardboard boxes full of family photo albums, Leo's childhood school drawings, my grandmother's old, stained recipe cookbooks, and the very few personal keepsakes that were not completely tainted by their lies. The day the large moving truck finally came, I took one last, slow walk through the completely empty house. Our footsteps echoed loudly in the silence. The rooms felt huge and cold. I paused in the kitchen, running my hand over the island counter. I felt a sharp pang of deep sadness for the younger woman who had been so incredibly happy here, so blissfully, tragically unaware of the snakes in her grass. But as I walked out the front door and locked it for the last time, I did not regret leaving. I was not running away. I was finally closing a dark chapter and opening a brand new book. We drove 3 states away. We moved to a small, quiet coastal town where absolutely nobody knew our names, where we had no history, and where we could finally learn to breathe again. We found a wonderful little 2-bedroom apartment on the 2nd floor of a quiet building. It had a big, wooden balcony that offered a beautiful, clear view of the deep blue ocean. It was much smaller, and far less grand than our old, wealthy house in the suburbs, but it was completely ours. It was paid for with honest money. It was safe. The first few months in the new town were incredibly hard. The quiet was the absolute loudest thing in the apartment. There were long, difficult days when I would just sit on the floor of our new living room, entirely surrounded by unpacked cardboard boxes, and feel a sudden wave of grief hit me so profoundly it literally took the breath from my lungs. I realized I was not just grieving the end of my marriage to Russell. I was grieving the complete loss of my sister. I was grieving the loss of my mother. I was grieving the brutal death of the entire family structure I thought I had always belonged to. I had to completely relearn how to exist alone. I had to walk into the local grocery store, push the cart down the aisle, and learn to buy food for 2 people instead of 3. I had to learn how to fix a leaky bathroom faucet by sitting on the tile floor and watching online repair tutorials on my phone. I had to slowly, painfully rebuild my entire life from the ground up, brick by brick. And I knew I had to do it not just for me, but for Leo. He needed a strong mother. We started very small. We found a great new public school for him. And after a slightly rocky, quiet start, he joined the soccer team and began to make good friends. I went out and got a part-time job at the town's quaint little independent bookshop. I spent my days surrounded by the comforting, familiar smell of old paper, leather bindings, and new stories. The repetitive tasks of shelving books and helping customers find novels was incredibly healing. Leo and I took long, quiet walks on the sandy beach every single day after school. We would take our shoes off, feel the cold sand between our toes, and just watch the massive ocean waves crash heavily against the shore, letting the salty sea air slowly wash away the dark memories. We started our own brand new traditions. Friday night was officially homemade pizza and a comedy movie, cuddled together on the small couch under a warm, knitted blanket. Sunday morning was strictly reserved for making huge stacks of blueberry pancakes together, laughing and getting white flour all over the tiny kitchen counters. Slowly, painstakingly, day by day, we began to build a beautiful new life. We built a new definition of what a family meant. It was a family based not on dark secrets and lies, but on the simple, honest, completely unbreakable bond between a mother and her son. The final, official legal chapter closed about a full year after we moved to the coast. The divorce was completely finalized by the judge. The civil court awarded me a very significant financial settlement. Through Evelyn Davies' relentless work, we successfully recovered almost all of the money they had illegally stolen over the years from my inheritance trust and our joint savings accounts. The criminal fraud case also finally concluded. Facing an overwhelming, impossible mountain of hard evidence and the threat of a trial, Beverly and Brenda's lawyer advised them to take a strict plea bargain to avoid serving actual prison time. They stood in front of a federal judge and pleaded guilty. They received incredibly hefty financial fines, hundreds of hours of mandated community service picking up trash on the highways, and 5 years of strict, long-term probation. I heard the aftermath through a distant cousin who occasionally called the bookshop to check on me. My mother, Beverly, was forced to sell her massive, beautiful, pristine colonial house just to pay off her massive legal fees and court fines. She moved into a tiny, depressing condo on the bad side of town. Brenda, completely cut off from Dale's money and Russell's stolen funds, was currently working the night shift as a cashier at a discount grocery store to make ends meet. Russell, completely unable to find any professional work in his corporate field due to his public criminal record, was living alone in a cheap, run-down apartment over an hour away, completely drowning in legal debt. The universe truly has a very funny, perfect way of eventually balancing the books. One day, about 2 years after everything exploded, an unexpected, thick letter arrived in my mailbox. It had been forwarded multiple times from my old address by the post office. I recognized the messy handwriting instantly. It was from Russell. I took the envelope out to my balcony, sat in my patio chair, and opened it. It was incredibly long. 10 full pages, handwritten on cheap lined paper, rambling, and heavily stained with what looked suspiciously like dried tears. It was 10 pages full of pathetic self-pity. He wrote that he was incredibly sorry. He wrote that he had made a terrible, stupid mistake. He wrote that he missed me and he missed Leo every single day of his miserable life. But even in his apology, he could not take real responsibility. He directly blamed Brenda for aggressively seducing him. He directly blamed my mother for constantly encouraging the affair and pushing the financial fraud. He blamed the immense stress of his corporate job. He blamed absolutely everyone in the world but his own selfish choices. At the very end of the 10th page, he asked if I could somehow find it deep in my heart to forgive him. He asked if maybe, someday soon, we could just sit down and talk. I read the long letter exactly once. I stood up on my small wooden balcony, the cool, salty ocean breeze gently ruffling my hair. I looked out at the vast, endless blue water. Then, I turned around, walked calmly back inside the apartment, and opened the kitchen drawer. I found a sharp pair of heavy metal scissors. I walked back out to the balcony. I did not feel angry. I did not feel sad. I just felt completely indifferent. I methodically cut the 10 pages of his letter into long strips. Then I cut the strips into tiny, square little pieces. I held the pile of shredded paper in my hands. I reached my arms over the wooden railing, opened my hands wide, and let the strong ocean breeze catch the pieces. I watched as the wind carried the confetti of his pathetic excuses away, scattering them far out over the crashing waves until every single piece was completely gone, swallowed by the sea. Forgiveness? Maybe, someday, far in the future. But if I ever find forgiveness, it will be strictly for my own mental peace, absolutely not for his personal absolution. He had not earned it, and he never would. My life is certainly not completely perfect now. There are still deep emotional scars. There are quiet days when a sad song comes on the radio while I am driving, and it will make my chest ache with a sudden, sharp phantom pain. Or there are days when I am walking through the park and I see a happy, smiling family having a picnic that looks exactly like mine used to, and I feel a quick pang of heavy loss for a beautiful lie I once fully believed in. But those scars are an important part of my story now. They are a daily, physical reminder of the incredible strength I never even knew I possessed until I was forced to use it. Leo is absolutely thriving. He is a tall, funny teenager now, with a massive appetite and a truly good, kind heart. He is the star goalie on his high school soccer team. He has a huge crush on a smart girl in his advanced science class, and he spends hours talking to her on the phone. Most importantly, he is happy. He is secure. And he is completely safe. And me? I am genuinely happy, too. I found a quiet, incredibly simple daily joy here by the ocean that I never, ever knew when I was living in that massive, beautiful, expensive house full of dark secrets. I have built a wonderful circle of loyal friends from the book club we host at the shop. I am taking a messy, fun pottery class on Thursday nights, learning how to shape clay with my own 2 hands. I am slowly, wonderfully learning how to be just Lorraine. I am no longer someone's devoted wife, or someone's obedient daughter. I am entirely my own person, standing on my own 2 feet. Sometimes, when I am working the afternoon shift at the bookshop, a customer will wander in from the street, looking a little lost. They will walk up to the counter and ask me to help them find a story with a really good, solid happy ending. Whenever that happens, I always smile to myself. I smile because after walking through absolute hell and back, I finally have a happy ending of my very own. It is certainly not a perfect fairy tale ending. It is not the traditional story I would have originally written for myself all those long years ago when I first got married. But it is a real ending. It is an honest one. It is the true story of a loyal, loving woman who was maliciously pushed right to the absolute edge of a tall cliff by the people she loved the most. And instead of hitting the ground, she found out that she could fly. Thank you so much for listening to my story today. Thank you for staying here, sharing your time, and being here with me through the darkest parts. If my journey has touched you in any way at all, if hearing my truth has made you feel even a little less alone in your own struggles, or if it has given you a tiny bit of strength to face your own difficult battles, please take a moment to share this video with someone else who might really need to hear it today. You truly never know whose life you might touch or whose heart you might help heal just by sharing a story. Please take wonderful care of yourselves out there. Remember your worth, stand tall, and never, ever let anyone in this world make you feel like you are anything less than you truly are. You are always so much stronger than you know. Goodbye for now, and thank you again.